Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at the Office of National Fellowships. If you haven't worked with us before, we are right across the hall, but I also have my colleague here.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Garcia-Glockner. I'm the Assistant Director for O&M.
Obviously we're here for a very specific purpose to talk about one of the fantastic fellowships that our office works with. We work with many, many others. And so just based on whatever your research interests may be, your graduate plans, future career plans, we can find relevant fellowships and opportunities throughout your time at Florida State that you would be eligible for, or opportunities like Schwartzman for after your time at Florida State as well. And so our office is here to help you navigate those application processes, write those essays, manage all of those other components, which include letters of recommendation or affiliation in some case. And so please feel free to reach out to us after this presentation. We would love to have a one-on-one meeting with you and talk about those goals that you have. But I'll have Sarah Fisher here with us. I'll let her introduce herself, and then we'll get started talking about Schwartzman.
Fantastic, great. What would be best? Do I pull the PowerPoint here?
Yeah, I can share screen.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, maybe while we're doing that, I can just give you a brief introduction of myself and what I do.
This one?
Yes.
There we
go. Wonderful. And can I just click next when
this should be, let's test it out. Let me make sure.
You have to click on the actual
first. Boom. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm Sarah Fisher. I work in the selection and outreach team at Schwartzman Scholars, and thrilled to be here first time in Tallahassee, first time on campus. So thank you for having me, and an incredible resource that you have here that I can definitely talk about, and why tapping into these resources is successful for opportunities like this and other incredible fully funded opportunities. And I can kind of give an overview of Schwartzman Scholars, what we do, what we're about, and about the admission process. But I also want to make sure that if you have questions, inquiries, concerns, that we get to all of that. And I think there's Caroline, Sarah, Miguel, and Stephen's your last name. Great. Okay, wonderful. So feel free to ask me questions, and we can try to make this conversational as we can. So I'll start off talking about this slide, but before I dive in, has anyone heard of Schwartzman Scholars like prior to coming here? Did you Google it? Did you look at it? Yes. So what do you know about Schwartzman Scholars?
I just know that it's like a fully funded master's program at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I found out about it through like a prior Schwartzman Scholars friend. Okay. So I've done a lot of research on it, and it's like the main fellowship that I'm interested in.
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, that's perfect. So at a very basic level, so Schwartzman Scholars is a fully funded master's program in global affairs at Tsinghua University in Beijing. We bring together a cohort of 150 scholars to live at the college, Schwartzman College on campus. Everyone is studying the same kind of core curriculum. There are a series of electives, but the idea of the program is really centered around bringing together these future global leaders to enhance and deepen intercultural understanding between the cohort, and at the same time fostering a deeper and more nuanced understanding of China. That's like the quick nuts and bolts. On a more kind of deeper qualitative level, we have this slide of community of future leaders, and I like starting with this slide because when I first started working at Schwartzman Scholars, I was like, this is bonkers. Like I'm from New Jersey, if that gives you any context. But when I think of leader, the word community does not like follow suit in that conversation. When I saw this, I was like, man, this must be very loud. It must be like a lot of people talking over one another, probably like a lot of ego, a lot of type A. And I think for me, what was really important and something that I think has been furthered in my time at Schwartzman Scholars is like really taking a long look at like what this word means to me, and like what does leadership mean in the society that I hope for in the future, across different sectors, across different cultural backgrounds, and what would the world look like, and what could policy or the environment or business look like if leaders were able to tap into a community that was diverse, that was committed to global understanding and a nuanced understanding of global affairs. So I hope you'll join me on this journey, if you will, to like really think about, okay, leadership can certainly mean one thing, but there can actually be a multifaceted definition of the word. And for you specifically, what does leadership mean to you? What is the kind of leader you hope to be? What is your leadership mission? What are your values? What do you see in the world that you want to make better? And thinking about how that can maybe play into your application to Schwarzman Scholars. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I think it's a nice way to start off because we talk a lot about leadership when it comes to Schwarzman Scholars. We are located at Tsinghua University, and Tsinghua, if you are familiar with Chinese history or even not, has a very strong legacy of leadership. Many leaders in China were educated at Tsinghua, and historically it was built to be a bridge between China and the rest of the world at times when China was opening up and interested in cultivating more of these relationships through academia. So it made a lot of sense to orient Schwarzman Scholars at Tsinghua University. So Tsinghua is a massive university similar to FSU, and Schwarzman College is a singular building that houses our classroom spaces, our cafeteria, your room, things like that. And so it's helpful just to kind of orient yourself like where we would be situated there. So a little bit about the program. So like I said, it's a master's in global affairs. It's something that's a little bit different across a number of different fellowships and scholarships. Is sometimes some of them you can choose what you study, or there's a wide variety of offerings. Curricularly speaking, you will have electives and different types of courses you can choose from, but everyone will graduate with a master's in global affairs. And I think it's really important to think about how global affairs can be highly interdisciplinary. Global affairs is certainly really important when we think about environmental policy, or when we think about education, or when we think about foreign relations. Even some hard sciences, STEM engineering. I think there are ways in which a deeper understanding of global affairs can play a role in the work that you do, right, in a variety of different sectors. And that's something that we think a lot about in our curriculum that focuses a lot on global affairs, leadership, and China. And so those three things sort of triangulate into the core curriculum, while at the same time you can definitely bring in your own expertise and the elements and areas that you're interested in. One thing that I really like about Schwarzman Scholars, I used to work at a university, more sort of traditional curriculum, is that the Schwarzman curriculum is very dynamic. To talk about global affairs is to talk about what are the pressing and leading issues of the day. Perfect example of this is our wonderful class of 2020, who started off the year with our professors came in, head of academics came in thinking, okay, this is what our curriculum is going to look like for 2019, 2020. And as you can imagine, living and learning in China, that curriculum had to change and pivot very quickly, not only in its delivery form, but also who are the speakers. What does leadership look like in a COVID world? How does China react to COVID? How is that affecting global policy as well as the economy, right? And we're still seeing the after effects of that. So that's something that I think is actually very exciting, is that you're not going to be studying the same exact thing, right, as previous classes, and certainly not in the future classes as well. It's sort of an ongoing living learning experience. To talk about China, I think is to talk about some very sensitive issues, but also the leading issues of the day, right? We see it on the news, with what Biden has been up to, right? And the ongoing conversation with Blinken. And I think those are really important topics that need to be discussed. And we have a lot of wonderful privileges at the college that, what talks about in the classroom stays in that classroom space. Our scholars have really a front row seat into China policy and the party, but also are able to take a step back and talk among a highly diverse cohort about different ideas and opinions and thoughts on that. And like I said, there are a lot of elective courses as well, depending on the kind of the sector that you may be interested in, but you can also take classes at Tsinghua University at large. This is called, do you question? Oh, no, sorry. This sort of culminates into like a capstone project, like a final project that can be take on a number of different forms, anything from a sort of traditional paper analyses to something that's more like a case study where you work with maybe 2 or 3 other scholars who have different nationalities, and you talk to a company in China about what is like some of the leading issues and challenges that they have, and you sit down with 3 people that come from 3 different countries, 3 different sectors, and say, okay, how do we tackle this problem? So the capstone can really range. And finally, we have Mandarin instruction that's compulsory for 1 module, but a lot of our scholars tend to take on more Mandarin. They're in China. One thing I will say too, and Justin and I talked about this leading up to the presentation, is the question of like, will I be in China? What's sort of the dynamic there? Currently, all of our scholars are at the college. The year prior, almost all of our scholars were at the college. It is of the utmost importance that we send all of our scholars to the college, that they have that experience in China. We want you to be not a China expert by the time you leave, but we want you to have a very deep understanding of China. And I think in order to do that, we need to actually be in that place. We help with the visa process in the case of the intense quarantine that had been applied up until very recently. We help our scholars through all of that process in order to get to the college. So that's important. And I think that correlates really well to this idea of experiential learning. Steve Schwarzman, our founder, was very insistent that as much as you'll have this classroom learning experience, you'll also have a very hands-on learning experience as well. This comes from personalized kind of mentoring programming that we have, where you'll be set up with a CEO or an executive director of a nonprofit or a government official that you have to check in with at least once a month as a sort of mentoring process. Having connections in China, this it's called guanxi, like the relationship that you can cultivate in China is really important, building those connections. And so this is like one step in the variety of connections that you'll make as part of your experience. But we also offer these deep dives. So it's anything from going to a business site like Alibaba and being able to tour. We offer political shadowing, where regardless of your nationality, you might be able to shadow a political official in China, which is really once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to do that. One deep dive that I think is really important, that has been really meaningful to our scholars, is rural deep dives. So being able to go to different parts of China that are more rural. It's very important, I think, to understand China is to leave Beijing. It's to see the kind of the wide variety of the economy, agriculture, education, local government, and see how that's run in different parts of the country. Also, it's also fun being a Schwarzman scholar. We have a very kind of like tight-knit college community. And I think we really do subscribe to the idea that, I'll just go here for a second, that of course your classroom experience should be really educational and learning a lot there, and a lot of material and speakers and what have you. But truly, I think some of the most transformative moments of being a Schwarzman scholar are these like late night common room conversations, which is actually the name of our podcast. You want to listen to that. But imagine you're in a cohort of 150 folks that come from 40 different countries, right? So many different backgrounds, and really their purpose of being there is they want to understand China, they want to understand the world in a deeper way, and they want to be a leader in their field. So I think some of these moments of building these connections and this understanding, this widening of your own perceptions and idea of the world can be expanded and changed. That's really what it means to be a Schwarzman scholar. And I think as a result, when you go into your respective field, right, even if that field changes and develops and morphs over time, is that you have this network of scholars that have this similar experience and are really interested in making a difference. And that's, I think, really Steve Schwarzman, when he was figuring out kind of the plans of the college, really wanted this sort of common room at the end of each hall. And the idea of the halls, too, is that you shouldn't be living next to anyone with the same nationality as you. And that it really furthers this, like, it can be deeply uncomfortable, but also highly, highly rewarding. Are there questions about anything that I've talked about so far? One thing I will also talk about is what it means to be fully funded. Sarah mentioned this in the very first breath of the explanation, so I will deepen that. So what it means for us to be fully funded is that we cover tuition, room and board, your flight to and from Beijing. We offer a laptop, which is very conveniently placed on this desk as a reminder for me to talk about it. This is also what your room would look like. It's a single room. You have your own bathroom, common area at the end of the hall. And we also give our scholars a stipend to help with, traveling with your friends during breaks, going out to restaurants, professional clothing, however you wish to spend that. Truly, this program should be at no cost to any of our scholars. There should be no out-of-pocket expense at all. So we want to make sure that we're able to support our scholars, at least financially, in this way. Any questions about any of that? Let me see. I'll mention the Dalio Auditorium just because I think it's one of these more transformative moments as well. So the Dalio Auditorium, we have a number of different speakers that come out, especially during pre-COVID now and post-COVID, whatever that means, in this new world, this new step of having speakers come to the college. Tony Blair, the late Marilyn Albright, John Kerry, all folks that have been able to come speak at the college. Some of these presentations are open to the wider Tsinghua community, some are just limited to short-term scholars. And we do have a pub at the college. So after the presentation, you go down to the pub, you have a pint with Tony Blair, and you talk about issues of the day, what have you. And it's just a normal weekend at Shortman College. But it is these really incredible moments, right? To have just to be in such close proximity to people you may have studied or read about. This is an example of a fireside chat because of the fireplace behind them. But they do tend to be kind of more informal presentations and talking about, those three core tenets of perhaps US-China relations or leadership or global affairs. Any questions about any of them? I should talk about the alumni network too. This is something that will be lifelong, right? Once you're a Schwarzman Scholar, you're always a Schwarzman Scholar. We want you to have access to this network. We have events all over the world, learning series, speakers, global affairs is obviously a forever evolving and changing and pressing topic. And we want you to be informed about that and make those connections, especially as our scholar network expands. We're in our recruiting for our 9th intake. So, hopefully, our alumni network will continue to grow. That way you can always be in touch with it. Any questions before I dive into admissions?
Oh, I have one actually.
Yeah, please.
You said that you could take courses from just Tsinghua University.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And are they also taught in English?
Great question. So there are classes that are taught in English. There is actually especially now moving into less restrictive COVID policies, there is quite an international population at Tsinghua. So there are classes that are taught in English. Some scholars too also have higher Mandarin proficiency. We do offer kind of an exchange, if a scholar takes a class in a certain department, that means a student from Tsinghua can also take some classes at Schwarzman College. So yes, you should have access to, especially if it correlates with something that you're specifically interested in, your elective coursework. We really do want to encourage our scholars to get out into Tsinghua.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Okay. So I can talk about this at length, but basically the barrier to entry for applying to Schwarzman Scholars is pretty low. In order to be an eligible applicant, we only have these 3 requirements. So one, and everyone here is, I think, I'm sure for all of these. The first one is an undergraduate degree, so having your bachelor's degree. Is anyone here a master's student? No, but we're all on track to get our undergraduate degree. Thought there'd be a little more enthusiasm there. Caroline's I don't know about this. Okay, eligibility is 18 to 28 years of age. So with the exception of 3 people in the room, that should be everybody. Maybe. And English proficiency, also all on track. Those are the only 3 requirements. You'll notice here it says nothing about China experience. It says nothing about Mandarin proficiency. It says nothing about the type of major that you need to have. Those are really the only 3 requirements that we are looking for. Now, in order to be, I think, a competitive applicant, kind of move to that next space, that next round, there's a few things that we're looking for here, and I'll delve into a few of them a little more in depth. Demonstrated leadership, I think the first one, it is very important for us in our process. But I also encourage you again to think about leadership in this really broad definition of the idea. You do not have to be president of every single club or every single group that you've been in. In fact, I think it's actually very healthy to have a balance of a number of different things. And we've certainly seen people with titles that don't do much, right? Or are actually kind of destructive. So, I think there's actually something to being a leader in other ways other than titles, right? Thinking about the ways that you're able to influence others, the change that you've been able to make in your community, whether that's here at FSU, whether it's your hometown, your home community, your department, sorority, whatever kind of, however that looks to you, I really encourage you to think about what that means. And the way to illustrate your leadership, I think, can come about in a few different ways in the application, but I'll also refer to Jesse and Bonnie's office to think about working with your resources on how to highlight your leadership. Because I think, this maybe not as much in the US, but around the world, and certainly depending on your personality, it's hard to talk about how great of a leader you are in an entire application, right? And it really can be helpful to have a team of people, whomever that is, to really help you and shepherd you through that process, because they're the best ones to sort of hold the mirror up, right? And to say, wow, look at all the incredible stuff that you're doing. And this is what you should really be highlighting. This is how you can really quantify it. That makes sense? The next thing I'll talk about is character, intercultural competency. These sort of go hand in hand for me. And I think very much correlates to this idea of leadership, right? You can be a leader, right? It does not mean that you have character or intercultural competency, right? We know this well. And imagine, right, you're going to be very much outside of your comfort zone at Shoresman College, right? And that's on purpose, that's by design. What we're interested in seeing is when you are faced with being uncomfortable, right? Maybe being challenged in a classroom setting, right? Or having a conversation with someone who has a very different opinion than you. How do you stand in the face of that conversation, right? How do you react or not? We're building a cohort here, right? We're building a community. And the way in which someone can demonstrate character and intercultural competency, I think is really key to that, especially when you think about going to China, right? It's a pretty disarming experience. And we want people to be able to go in with open eyes and an energy and enthusiasm towards understanding, right? Rather than something like correcting, maybe. And the last thing I will mention is academic aptitude. We don't have a GPA requirement for Shoresman Scholars, which is a little bit different from some other fellowships. Academic aptitude, of course, can mean GPA, but to me, academic aptitude is also reflected in things like your critical thinking skills, your ability to converse in the classroom, the way in which you interpret text and ideas and can synthesize and collaborate, right? So I think there's a lot of ways to demonstrate academic aptitude. We do look at your transcript, but there's also different elements that you can add to the application to demonstrate. Which leads to how can you apply? So we do have an online application. Oh, yes, please.
Before you continue, I'm sorry. So I think the last aspects that you just mentioned are very important. How are those aspects measured? Potentially, if you can dive into a little bit more detail.
How are they measured in terms of
academic aptitude?
One more time?
On the academic aptitude.
Yeah, so I think there's like the quantitative and the qualitative pieces too, right? Like certainly we actually don't even, because we are a global application process, we don't even say this is the GPA. Like we don't write down like this student has a blank GPA, just because we're reading universities from all over the world, right? A 4.0 construct doesn't even apply to most universities. So even translating that across the board. I mean, we look at your coursework and how you've done in the context of your coursework. But and that's sort of the quantitative piece, but then we also ask for, and this sort of goes to like these other pieces, but we ask for 3 letters of recommendation. Right. And typically, if you're applying from undergrad, one of those should be a professor, right? Or someone that you've interacted with in an academic capacity. And they can certainly be able to speak to academic aptitude, right? In the context of your classroom or their experiences with you. There are essays as well that you can use to explain different projects, the ways in which you're intellectually or academically engaged or curious about something. We do offer another section in the online application that asks if there are any sort of extenuating circumstances you feel like we need to know about, if there's been sort of, say, an upward trend in academics or a dip in one semester, one term due to X, Y, or Z. So there's a lot of spaces, I think, in which you can explore that. And that's something that we really review holistically and contextually in your application. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So just rephrase a little bit. So we do this online application that is really kind of basic information, a few short answers, the sort of extenuating circumstance question that I just mentioned. And then we do have these supporting documents. So we ask for 2 essays. So one is a statement of purpose, which is pretty typical for a lot of fellowships, and the other is asking about your leadership. And talking about your leadership a little more in that leadership narrative. We ask for 3 letters of recommendation. And again, reading really contextually here. If you're applying right from undergrad, it can make total sense that 3 of your recommenders or 2 of your recommenders are based here at FSU, or folks that you've worked with, maybe it is an internship over the summer. We typically do recommend that one of your recommenders is from an academic capacity. And then we do ask for your transcript and your CV, your resume as well. And those are sort of the supporting documents that will go into that. I'll skip to the timeline here just because I think it's helpful. So our application will go live in mid-April, and this timeline is a little bit different than what we're sort of used to in the US, so bear with me here. So if anyone here holds a passport from China, Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan, you would follow this top timeline here. Everyone else follows the US global timeline. Sorry, my everyone else would follow this like US global timeline. The application will go live in mid-April. And then you have some time to complete the application. We don't offer like rolling admission. It doesn't benefit you to submit beginning of May. You want time. It will take time. This is not something that you fill out, you enter your email and create an account here. Don't do that. You'll do that like, okay. Right, everyone? And look, it can feel a little daunting at first, right? It is only more of an in-depth application. It's not like you're just applying to, your summer, food services job. It does take a lot of time. There are essays, there are letters of recommendation, like I mentioned. Starting to think about it around here, create an account. Just start clicking through. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to fill anything out. Just see what the questions are asking you, because already you're starting to plant the seeds. My other recommendation too, because people are like, well, what can I do now? Is start to talk to your recommenders. It is poor form and like rude to like ask your recommender over here, right? Start to develop these relationships, right? Because they're going to be going to bat for you. And it's not only, I really like this person. They're great. I love them. It's why Schwarzman Scholars, what kind of leader are they? The academic aptitude piece. Like there are ways in which you can work with them to highlight certain parts of these key traits that we talked about, right? So start the conversation now, and then my tip, if you're comfy with it, is to say that it's due early September. And so by the time it's submitted, it's on time by late September. And because we don't accept late documents, right? So you want to make sure that timing hits. I'll turn it over to my friends in the fellowship. But do you have anything to add before I just wrap up here about the application timelines?
No, I appreciate your white lie about deadlines for recommendation letters. We absolutely advise that for Fulbright. My comment is that I think the timeline is really helpful because this is pretty much aligns with our exact timeline for Fulbright, for Rhodes, for Marshall, Mitchell, Gates, Cambridge, like all of these other fellowships that are on. postgraduate experiences or graduate degree enrollment. And so typically, you know, when we're recruiting for Fulbright and these other fellowships, we will try to, based on your interest, like, you know, funnel you towards these other opportunities like Schwarzman. Because if you can apply for a Schwarzman, you can apply for a Fulbright, or you can apply for some of these other things. And so we try to balance them together, because working on a Schwarzman application would be indirectly working on some of these others. And so you can pull elements from these essays, you know, morph and adapt them to the different awards. And so I really appreciate you outlining this, because it aligns perfectly with what we're already recruiting for right now.
Fantastic. And yeah, my thing is, you know, work smart, not hard, right? If you're already completing other applications for highly competitive fellowships, there are ways in which we ask very similar things, right? And I'll talk about this in the next session that I do, but creating this narrative is so important. And it really does make for so much of a stronger, punchier application. And so if you really have a narrative that like you are really comfortable using and you feel like tracks across these different fellowships, like I think that's a great way to spend your time and to conserve energy. The last thing that I'll mention is, you know, when the application closes in late September, we do have our interviews for our finalists. We invite about 300 folks to interview. We'll hopefully be doing it in person. One interview site in New York and the other in London. So we'll fly our finalists out for that to interview with our panel. And then we notify in early December. I know we do have a, am I over time?
I mean, we have this room from 11 till noon. So
Okay.
yeah, we still have
So do you want to play, we can play Jesse's video,
Yeah,
if that's
we can do that.
helpful? Yeah, do you want to?
Oh, no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to see if there were just any final questions before we're going to hear from an actual scholar, which I think is really helpful, but were there any questions before we dive into that? Okay.
Who like makes up the interview panel? Like what type
Good
of
question.
people are there?
Yes, yes, and yes, what is this? So one thing I'll mention just to preface is that, again, this goes back to like your team of people that you're going to have. A lot of these fellowships have an interview stage, and that's not something you necessarily want to go about alone. Like you have excellent resources that can help you prepare for interviews, people that again are going to be like help kind of lift you up, because it's an interview where you have to kind of talk about yourself and talk about some deeper topics, and sometimes there are interesting questions that you'll have to contend with. So you can have preparation for this. Our interview process is basically, Steve Schwarzman, our founder, believes that current leaders can recognize and identify some of the characteristics and traits of future leaders, right? So we have you interview with a panel of CEOs, ambassadors, executive directors of nonprofits, politicians, university presidents. It's not intimidating at all. No, I'm just kidding. It can be a little, it can feel a little threatening. It is not meant to fluster you. It is really like a 20-minute conversation where you really get to talk about your application and the things that you have set forth. The only time that they would ask a question that doesn't necessarily correlate to your application or something that you're interested in is our one current affairs question. That is based on something that is happening in the world and will not come as any surprise to you. They're very open-ended. I think the one last year, like as context that we asked in the New York round was, well, we know the answer now, but should Donald Trump be allowed back on social media, like on Twitter platforms? Like, right, you're the head of Twitter. What would you do here? So it's putting you in that like leadership, that kind of pilot position, and there are a variety of answers, right? And we know what ended up happening, but it's really, and I think Jesse and Buddy would second me on this, that for these interviews, right, it's not so much what you're saying is like sometimes how you say it, right? And how sometimes how do you react when you like don't know the answer to something, right? Or when you understand that you don't have all the information to make an important decision. Who are the people you call on? What are the resources that you would tap into? What would the opposition say? Things like that I think are wonderful skill sets to have in a lot of interview settings. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
I was just kind of looking for the appropriate time, but I think it's about now.
Yes.
just out of curiosity, how does this diploma look back home? Applying for, State Department or applying for different NGOs, potentially you can speak on previous alumni's experiences or.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we do have a lot of resources that talk about what kind of our alumni are doing, and they're all doing really incredible, really impactful work that I think we're very, very, very proud of. Our scholars want to do a number of different things, anything from going back to the jobs that they had in the specific sector that they wanted, making a complete pivot altogether, maybe going private sector, maybe going government, founding their own startup, tech, etc. I think your question of like, how does the degree look back home? I think is there's a number of different ways to look at this. I think for one, being a fellow, being a scholar of something, right, is capital that can be added to resumes, right? And it's I think because employers can recognize not only did you get a degree, but you have an experience and a set of skills, you have connections, you have a network, you were selected in a highly competitive applicant pool. And then on top of that, Tsinghua University is like the male part of China. Peking University, Tsinghua University are two of the oldest universities in China. They're extremely highly regarded. If you look at global university lists, like these are some of the top universities that you'll see. Perfect example of this is that they've just kind of opened up some of the visa processes in the UK as a result of Brexit. And if you graduated from a top 50, top 25 university on a few different global lists, then you have visa privileges to work in London, for example. And Tsinghua is on all three of those lists, right? So it's something that's really highly regarded globally. We get the question too, of like, okay, I'm interested in Schwarzman Scholars. I'm also interested in a Harvard MBA, right? Great program. I think there's some similarities, right? You get an excellent education, you have a network. I think the added piece here is that you have China exposure, right? You have connections all over the world. You're part of incubator for global leaders. You have professional development and resources to kind of help you with these next steps. And then the last thing that I'll mention is that you did mention like State Department opportunities where you would need clearances and background checks. We've had no issues with any of our scholars moving forward in any of those processes. I think if anything, a lot of entities regard this as a big value into whatever kind of project they're working on or part of government that they're interested in. Does that answer?
Mm-hmm. And then my final question is the layout of kind of the education. Is it more US inclined? Is it like global neutral in terms of like classes, grading? I know it's highly diverse with multiple students. Yeah. And the program is hosted in English, correct?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
So just kind of structure.
You mean in terms of like the pedagogy, like how the class is taught, or you mean like the assignments or
everything?
Well, everything. It will depend. It will depend on the class. It depends on who's teaching it. We understand that our scholars are coming from a variety of different backgrounds. And so there's a lot of prep that, we have our faculty go through to make sure that they can really cast a wide net in terms of like responsive pedagogy and assignments. One thing I will say is that we do have a few classes that are team taught. So it'll be a professor from a Stanford professor and a professor from Peking University or from Tsinghua. So it's team taught between like a US professor and a China professor. Some of this is because curriculum oversight is pretty strong in China. That there are certainly very sensitive topics that are being discussed at the college, and making sure that there is a leading voice in that room from the China perspective is very important. But I think you're also tempering that with some of kind of the norms that we can expect from a US classroom, right? Asking questions or the certain types of assignments. But I think there's a lot of kind of preparation for that to make sure that our scholars feel academically prepared for the structure, the assignments, the way that classes are taught, things like that. Does that make sense? It's a great question.
Thank you.
Yes, this is my last question. Sorry for no, but I was just curious what the distribution is from Schwartzman scholars who have already who are in postgraduate opportunities and careers, and then people who are right out of undergrad. So I'm just kind of worried about not matching up.
Yes, great question. So I think this is what you're getting at is when do people apply?
Yes.
Yes. So our average age is about 24. So we're really right in the middle, and I'll refresh here, but we're right in the middle of this, right? We have very, very few 18-year-olds with an undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
So not less. But 24, I think is that average, right? Because we do have a number of people that are coming right from undergrad, and we do have people with some work experience, right? Like in this incoming cohort, I think we have one person who's 28, right? Or just turned 28. In our process. And so it does sort of it does range. And I think that's actually the big question that I get when I talk to prospective scholars is when is the right time for me? And I think some of it goes to these traits. If you're looking at this and you're I have examples of all of these things and that I'm really excited to talk about, that I feel I'm ready for this step. Then I think go for it, right? There's no application fee. Yes, it takes time, but you also have incredible resources and people that can support you. And if there's no application fee, we have people that have applied two times, 3 times. We saw that made them on their 4th time up until the age of 28, right? You have time to work on it. In fact, repeat applicants are some of our most successful applicants, they've been through the process before. So I think it's really a self-reflection question, right? When is the right time for me? If you are interested in going to Schwarzman right after you graduate, though, you'll start looking at this as a junior. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that timeline sometimes gets a little fuzzy. You're really gearing up for something that's not going to happen for another year.
So you're timeline for Fulbright.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's but if you're a senior, that's also great, right? You'll have this kind of 1 year. Or if you decide, I'm not quite ready, I'm going to wait a little bit, you join the workforce. But this is something that even when you're working, right, you can continue to work on. And I don't know what your policy is for people.
We're happy to.
Yeah.
It's if you're enrolled at another university where it can get tricky because we're not trying to step on toes. So if you're at Arizona State University, then they have a fantastic fellowship office. You have to work with them. We can't. But if you're just working, or just floating in the ether something we would love to work with you. So please feel free to reach out to us. So, and which I think the video that we have from one of our alumni applied as an alumnus, just reached back out and was just hey, I'm going to do this thing. Can you help? So
yeah. That's a good segue too.
Yeah, perfect. Because Jesse Marks, I think, is one of those excellent examples, one of our ONF all-stars, and that's not because they received a lot of the fellowships they applied for, but because they were very adamant about pursuing their professional goals. They using the resources as an honor student at FSU through the Center for Undergraduate Research and Academic Engagement, and of course through ONF. And I think an excellent example of this fellowship because of the nuance that Sarah is speaking to about global affairs. And so I remember when I first this was because Jesse was one of our 2018 Schwartzman scholars. And so back when I heard that he was interested in applying, I was because my assumption was just oh, Schwartzman, China, and Jesse's background and experience was all in Arabic in the Middle East and just in a part of the world where I was that's great. I'm glad you're applying, and so that's why I'm going to let him speak a little bit more to it, is because he's going to talk about how his experiences at Florida State in the Middle East through some of these other fellowships that we work with, really led him to Schwartzman. Sorry. I am not very technologically proficient, so please, excuse me while I pull this up and make sure that we're good to go.
Hi, everyone. I thank you for letting me join you all today. Wish I could be there in person. You guys are gearing up for a really powerful and incredible opportunity. So I'm here to share a little bit about my time at Florida State, at Tsinghua University with the Short-Term Scholars Program, and how those two things have really played into my career and what I'm doing now. My name is Jesse Marks. I currently am Senior Advocate for the Middle East at Refugees International, where my work more broadly focuses on providing protecting for refugees and displaced populations in the middle of crises in the Middle East. As you may know, at least at the time of this recording, we are working and facing one of the worst crises to have hit the Middle East, particularly in Turkey and Syria, following an earthquake on February 6th. Our organization has been heavily involved in the response to that. My work particularly has focused very heavily on ensuring and advocating for aid access to hard-to-reach areas in northwest Syria, and ensuring that the international community and donors are fully funding the humanitarian response. But I think to how I got here, I go back to when I turned 17 in late high school. I'd always had an interest in archaeology, and particularly biblical archaeology, and many of the sites in the Middle East were always kind of on my horizon. I wanted to go and have the chance to explore, to run around them, and ultimately to dig. That love for dirt and that love for digging did not turn into a degree in archaeology. However, through my time in the Middle East, I got to know a lot of the Middle East community, a lot of the Arab world, and began to speak Arabic and fell in love with the community that I was engaging with. I learned and found a very unique culture and history and people, some of which, my own heritage come from. It was a very unique experience. I had the chance, following the Arab Spring, I was not able to really understand, and a lot of complex emotions evolved in the 2011 period. I realized, I could not be empathetic to kind of the suffering that had been going on in the region simply because I could not understand it. In an effort to understand it, I went to Florida State University to study Arabic and Middle East Studies under Dr. Zeina Shlonoff and Dr. Peter Gerritsen. And the two profoundly shaped my intellectual upbringing, but also, my horizons when it came to the types of jobs and the types of pursuits that I could have. I remember one quote Dr. Gerritsen told me. He's like, you can have a career in which, you go to the office, or you go do what you do from 9 to 5, but you can also have a profession, which is where you live for what you do. It's not that you're married to your work, but rather that there's a mission behind what drives you and what you do in your day-to-day life. I must admit that both of them rubbed off very heavily on me. And I had the chance through FSU, through the Arabic language program, through the Middle East history program, and through a lot of my extracurriculars, including working with international students at the Center for Intensive English, as well as working on behalf of the international students and student government to ensure that international students had a voice and what happens to them on campus, and the types of policies that influenced or impacted them in day-to-day life. Ultimately, all of my time at FSU and tailored what would be my introduction to the Office of National Fellowships. And for me, a venture into the world of applying for fellowships and understanding that there is funding out there that would allow me to pursue my dreams and my passions in a manner where, not having had a lot of money and working to pay my way through school, I could go study abroad, I could go study Arabic, I could go spend time building the necessary skill sets that I needed, the networks that I needed, and gaining the experiences that I needed to be successful for the profession to come. And FSU really equipped me for that and helped me understand all the opportunities on the table. Following FSU, I had the chance to do a Boren Scholarship in Jordan, followed by a Fulbright Fellowship in Jordan. And in both of those cases, I was really able to cut my teeth really into this field. I was able to deal firsthand on many of the refugee crises I continue to work on now, including the Syrian refugee crisis. While in Jordan on a Boren, I had the chance to intern for the country director at the UN Refugee Agency at the height of the Syrian refugee crisis and migration to Europe. During my time as a Fulbright scholar, I was able to do direct research related to the topic that I had experienced firsthand at UNHCR. And over those few years, I was able to get a lot of on-the-ground experience and really understand the types of struggles that people were facing, the types of policy challenges, the regulatory environment, the day-to-day protection challenges that people faced in the region. Ultimately, this oriented me to try to understand the long-term possibilities facing Syria. Questions like, how do you rebuild? How do you ensure that people are able to return at some point safely? protected without being exposed to acute vulnerabilities such as retaliatory attacks and a lot of these other long-term questions around the sustainability of what we call durable solutions. Those solutions that allow people to either return to stay where they're at and integrate local communities or ultimately be resettled. But I was plagued with a question in 2018. And it was an intellectual journey. It set off an intellectual journey that would bring me to China, which is, how do you ultimately rebuild a country if a lot of the international actors that are engaging on it don't have the money and don't have the interest? And at the time, China had raised several $1 billion, and I had read the news that China had raised $7 billion for Syrian reconstruction. I had no understanding exactly of what it was for or how. So pretty much in 2017, 2018, I started studying Mandarin and was pretty desperate to understand exactly how China's role in the Middle East would reshape the climate around conflict and peace and conflict resolution, civilian protection, a lot of these major issues that I've been dealing with in my career thus far. The Schwarzman Scholars Program was the opportunity that enabled me to go to Beijing and more formally study China's role in the world, Chinese politics, Chinese role in international relations, foreign policy, and more interesting for my work, China's role in global development and mediation and conflict. And it was through this opportunity that I was able to study alongside students from all over the world, including China. I was able to hear a diverse range of perspectives that until now have informed how I do my work and my understanding of the world around me. Some of those relationships have extended long into my life now, based at my place where I'm at Washington, D.C., or even when I'm back in the Middle East. I'm still able to see Schwarzman scholars from all over the world, including, my colleagues from China. We were in friends that I got to know that period. In many cases, we worked together, wrote papers together, had meals together. Recognizing that there are certainly gaps in the ways that people see the world. Having the experience of Schwarzman scholars and at Tsinghua University allowed me to recognize that those gaps exist, but also understand the people behind the view and to be able to understand exactly the way that they think, why those gaps persist, where our differences of opinion are, but also how we bridge those and recognize the humanity in the other person. Fundamentally, FSU equipped me to be able to compete at kind of the global level for a program like Schwarzman Scholars and at Tsinghua University. And I will say that those two opportunities, among others, have reoriented my career and have enabled me to be competitive at high levels of work, having served in the U.S. government, as well as, currently in my role, getting to advocate on behalf of millions of people in the Middle East who are facing acute vulnerabilities. At the end of the day, I am grateful for both of these programs, and I think you all are entering this exciting journey and incredible opportunity. So I encourage you to take advantage of the resources that you have at FSU, but also don't be limited. Go on Google, go search, reach out to alumni, reach out to me if necessary, and talk to folks. Try to understand what these programs are. There are a lot of resources out there. If you're a community college or a transfer student and feel like you're just trying to get in, you only have, say, 2 years at FSU. I'm a transfer student, I'm a community college student, and FSU enabled me to be successful in both of these, like in my career, but through both of these communities, these identities have not hindered me in any way, right? I always used to say that though I only had 2 years at FSU, being a transfer student allowed me to prioritize and try to better understand how to use my time wisely. And I wouldn't take it back. I would not take, though, there are days I wish I had 4 years at FSU. Those 2 years were rich. They were deep. They were full of dear friends. They were full of Arabic and Arab culture and getting to know the community that I wanted to work with and live with. And even weirdly in my own life, it opened up a journey of reconnecting with family that I had not known for years who lived in the region and opened up an entire part of my life and history that I had never really explored. So get ready for your journey, enjoy it. Don't be afraid to ask for help, but also don't be afraid to take initiative and chart your own path forward. Good luck.
Like I said, truly a wonderful person. But I mean, just to really echo what Jesse said is, these processes are extremely challenging, and we know that, these are, if it makes you feel any better, these are not opportunities that I pursued when I was an undergraduate, partly because I didn't know they exist, partly because I didn't have the kind of belief in myself to really pursue them, but also I was very stubborn and I refused to ask for help. I would just do it on my own. And so we're not here to judge, we're here to support, we're here to genuinely help you be as competitive on paper as you can be in an interview. We know that writing process is very challenging. So whether you're a first year student, second, third, fourth year, or soon to be alumnus, does not matter. We're happy to get started working with you to apply for obviously Schwartzman, hopefully, because you're all here. But also other opportunities maybe that if you're not eligible for Schwartzman yet, that could be really helpful in helping you flesh out what those goals are. And then, when you are a senior or an alumnus, pursue an opportunity like Schwartzman. So feel free to come and talk to us whenever that time is appropriate. Now I know we're low on time, but I'll turn it over to you for any final words to wrap us up. But we do have another presentation in the same room at 1 o'clock today, a writing workshop that will dig more into the application process, what these essays are really looking for. And so if you can join us, please feel free to do so. We would love to have you there. But otherwise, at least from ONF, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts? Or?
No, thank you for hosting. And again, I think I'll echo Jesse on the screen is, there's there are people that are here to support their online resources through our, my team, my admission team, ONF, professors, friends, faculty, aunts, uncles, pets. These are all people that and entities that can support you in this process, whether it's Schwartzman or other opportunities you're looking to pursue. So thank you for coming and thanks for tuning in and be in touch. I can give you my business card too if you have any further questions.
Thank you.